we had some terrorist events that occurred in the United States prior to 9/11. We had the Trade Center, the first attack by Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. We had Oklahoma City bombing. We had the attack from Eric Rudolph at the Olympic Park bombing. So we had some events that occurred that showed we did have risk and vulnerability. Where do you think the insurance industry was following those events? And then after 9/11, do they understand the global risk, the US risk, especially from these type of organizations? We're going to talk about cyber later. Can you give me your perspective on, is it a reactionary model where something happens and then we look at underwriting and preparing for the risk? Or is it a proactive to look at the threat picture and intelligence like we do in the national security space, and then we calculate that risk and put assets on it? Talk to me about the insurance industry and how they look at it and how they evaluate risk.
Well, I'll tell you, it's insurance is oftentimes based on data and learning from history. We're seeing a bit of a transition in that with actually having more big data. But back during 9/11, as I mentioned, that the planning and the prediction of such a large event wasn't there based on data and history. It was relatively unknown. But as they've learned from these events, and unfortunately, some of these events have increased, the industry has begun to be able to learn more about terrorism and terrorism threats. And there are some insurers that have the capital to be able to underwrite terrorism events. But there are also many other insurers that simply don't have that same capital backing. And that's why you still need, I think, the government backstop of what is the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, or was originally. It needs to be there because it needs to be there for the stability of the broader industry. As much as we do know that there are some insurers and who can and are underwriting terrorism, we still probably do, and that's why we are, and just saw a reauthorization of the legislation. So I think we're learning about this, and that's what the industry is doing. And the industry as well, to get to your question about proactiveness, the industry is really here with terrorism, but also in large on a lot of other climate-related risks, and others it's shifting itself from being one that detects the catastrophe and then comes in and repairs it, to actually predicting and preventing it, and focusing more on kind of making communities more resilient. But I think there's a careful balancing act that we need to understand as well. It's not just about underwriting and pricing risk, when you're talking about the likes of terrorism or climate related risks as well. It's also about taking proactive measures, and also making sure that, to your point about law enforcement, that we're working hand in hand with law enforcement, exchanging data when it makes sense, to make sure that we can, again, predict and prevent these in a way that the consumer is protected. And it's not just about that policy itself. It's more about a balanced act between government predicting, preventing, providing resilience, along with private industry doing the same, and making sure then that insurance can come in when it makes sense too.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point you bring up. So when I was the Undersecretary for Intelligence, in statute, my job was to share information with the private sector. It was stood up after 9/11, specifically for terrorism 9, but then it became all threats. Myself and Chris Wray with the FBI were the two leads for the US government on the homeland. And the one thing that I would say for the insurance industry, because we're speaking to our carrier and association members today, is investing in those partner engagement roles with the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, to get that threat risk picture, and where applicable and possible, sponsor clearances with your security officers or your intelligence hubs within your organizations. The FBI and DHS will help you with that. And I would say the financial sector, critical infrastructure, travel, energy sector, entertainment, Major League Baseball, National Basketball Association, National Football League, we had robust relationships with them. And talking to my peers, there's room to grow in the insurance industry and those relationship and partnerships. So for those of us that are listening to you and I, is engaging in those information sharing groups that DHS and FBI have. They're on their websites. We can surely go, if you contact us at NICB, we can help you with those, where to go and how to get on those organizations or engagement. But understanding the risk picture, because the national security apparatus in the United States is always going to have the most information, but it takes a whole of government and whole of community and whole of private sector approach to it, because the risk evolves globally, and it is so broad now, involving so many different industries. And we'll talk about cyber later and why it's so critical in the cyberspace.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there needs to be a exchange, a systematic approach. And again, I mean, we're talking here today about terrorism, but we're also just coming out, trying to come out, I should say, of a pandemic, which also, again, is a largely uninsurable event. We've got to make sure that we're working hand in hand with government as we're trying to predict, prevent, and protect our customers and our citizens from these threats that exist.